everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on education, skill and learning. This is our 739 episodes. We have our world famous speaker, Madam Ali, Dr. Talib Raphael, and Mr. Donald. Uh, Madam Ali Rice, what you want to discuss for today's session?
Okay, so education is the thing that I've got the most experience in, actually. So I've worked in education for over 30 years. And I've actually run creative learning projects, actually. So most of them have been designed to re-engage children that are disengaged, or actually work with the talented and gifted as well. So, and I think for me, creativity is kind of key to that too. So, and I've worked with primary school, in fact, nursery school children, primary age children, secondary and college students as well. And I think one of the key things is that if you do a student-led project so that they have ownership of what they do, it makes a massive difference. And also I kind of lead a creative process so that their input is just as much and just as important as mine, really. So I think that creative process and kind of having a shared experience and a group experience is really important. So for me, and the very foundation stone, to be honest, of education is the home that the children come from. So, you know, their experience before they even turn 5 in this country makes a massive difference to how they move forward. So, you know, reading books so that they have stories and gain knowledge and experiences as well. You know, all the experiences and the foundation support that they get from their parents before they even go to school is kind of critical to how they see learning. So, and I think the most important thing is if they've got awe and wonder in the world, they want to learn, they want to know more. And one of my best quotes actually from Donald, you know, every time you meet somebody new, it opens a new world up to you as well. So, and that's always kept with me. And I think it's the same, you know, with anyone, whether they're, you know, 5 or 60. So I think that kind of the experience and information you can gain from kind of communicating with other people and understanding, you know, their knowledge and their experience of life is really important too. So yeah, so my first thoughts really are creativity are key. And definitely, and it's in 1992, NASA did a survey of children that were only 4 and 5 years old. And their theory was that 98% of those children scored at genius level. And they're convinced that, you know, schools kind of dumbed down that genius that they had. So I think, and I'm quite heavily connected to Genius U as well. So I actually fundamentally believe that we've got gifts and talents and genius. And you know, Einstein's quote that if you judge a fish by how well it can climb a tree, I think it's, you know, we've all got kind of strengths and weaknesses, and you know, so, but I do think there's kind of genius in everyone, and I think finding it's kind of critical, really. And we're all different learners as well, you know, there's different so I think there's all kinds of problems with the way the school system and the education system is for the people that aren't naturally academic. So yeah, that's my first thoughts.
Thank you. And now I request Mr. Donald.
Well, I've worked in education mostly with adults. So one of the things that David Smith often talks about is the importance of lifelong learning. So I've actually taught classes in Finland for people that are being retrained because the particular course the particular job skill that they had was outdated and they needed to learn new skills. So education works all the way from the very beginning until through your entire life. And it's something that one of the things about it that I think is really important, though, is I've taught a lot of people. I mean, tens of thousands. And one thing I learned right away, I realized right away, is everybody teaches themselves everything. Teachers don't, you can't open a person's head, you know, kind of like cut a little thing and lift their head up and go and pour in knowledge. That's not the way it works. It's something that you have to do, that the person has to do themselves. So fundamentally, I'm really agreeing with what Ollie's saying, is that we have to think about how it is that we can create environments for people to be able to teach themselves and grow themselves. And no one knows everything. And we have a tendency in our minds to attribute genius or attribute actions to people that they haven't really, that aren't really them. So we say Steve Jobs, for instance, Elon Musk is a big guy right now, and supposedly Elon Musk invented the Tesla, he invented SpaceX, he's done this, he's done that, but he hasn't. He just bought those companies. They were existing companies. So, but in our mind, we give credit to people. In fact, the head of NASA said that she was very relieved to find out that Elon Musk had nothing to do with SpaceX. That's what she said. And so we attribute genius to people. And the reason I'm saying that is because part of education is being able to learn how to get the benefit from other people, because really if we need to know something, there's somebody who knows it, and we don't have to always figure out everything ourselves. So what we have to learn is how to be able to get the information from our environment. But then back to the whole thing of education as institutions like schools and things like that. You have to understand that the history of public education in the West is all about was co-created with the Industrial Revolution, and or a little before, but with manufacturing, and the point of it has always been to train workers. And so it's, to me, I kind of make a distinction between training and education. And training is what you do to an AI or to somebody, where you're teaching them skills so that they can do some specific task. And a lot of the education system in in the West has been developed with the goal of teaching people to do certain specific tasks so that they'll work, be able to get jobs and work within industry. And in a sense, there's nothing really wrong with that. But I also believe that education itself is important too. And as I said, that's something that you do yourself. There's a buzzword that people use, which is critical thinking skills. And I read a paper that said that did a good study, and they found out that people get critical thinking skills in one domain, and it doesn't necessarily transfer to another domain. So in other words, we think of critical thinking skills as a high level skill that we can apply anywhere, but it really isn't. It's you have to get critical thinking skills in each different subject. But be that as it may, if you think of just literature, when you're reading a book and you're trying to understand, I don't know, when I was a kid, I had to read David Copperfield and Moby Dick and things like that. And one of the things that you do when you're in a literature class is you try and understand what's underneath the words. Like what's the story within the story? Like how at a deeper level, the people's emotions and the people's values and all of those things are working, like how you can read underneath it. And the whole idea of communicating and learning from other people is you need to be able to do that, because people don't always say things in the best possible way. But people still, every person has value and knowledge. And so this idea that you can just get trained by by chat GDP or something like that, and that you don't need interaction and people getting together. You might be able to train people to do specific things that way, but you won't really educate them. And that's why one of the reasons I think Finland's system is so great, because they don't have homework. The classes can never go more than 45 minutes without a 15-minute break, and then the kids play with each other for 15 minutes. The lessons are taught by play, because if you can somehow teach people to be curious, and once you have curiosity as part of yourself, you're going to be able to educate yourself your whole life by yourself. I mean, I was a software engineer for 25 years, and I taught myself how to do it. I was completely self-taught. I was a sociology graduate student at Stanford, a visiting scholar, and I completely taught myself sociology. So you can teach yourself anything if you're motivated. And so I agree back with Ali said, that we have geniuses and we ungenius them. And what we need to do is, in education, is really concentrate on being able to get the native curiosity that people have, and give them the resources and ability to be able to find what they need to do to satisfy their curiosity. Thank you.
Thing that we're not on these calls.
Well, I guess I should go next. Rob, you think?
They thought we were.
Yep.
Yeah, you go next.
Yeah,
We go clockwise.
this topic is one that I just love, as you know. And Donald, thank you for talking about how I often talk about lifelong learning, because lifelong learning is so important today. And it doesn't have to be a college degree type of lifelong learning. Increasingly today, we're doing boot camps, we're doing online classes, we're doing all different types of ways to increase the ability for people to adapt and have skills. Because think about what the real definition is of education. It's a process through which society, organizations, people pass on the knowledge, values, and skills from one generation to another. And I kind of like that definition, because it's not just what we think of as a formal education, but it's the knowledge, values, and skills. And those are so important for us to do.
Somehow you muted yourself, David.
David, you accidentally muted yourself.
Well, I understand that it hit. Sorry, I'm not used to presenting quite the way I'm presenting this morning. But we love to see how education can work, how the elements can work, and it's a complicated system, but it's one that we need to work more on. So actually, I think I need to let Rob go right now, and I'll come back and finish later.
Okay.
Yeah, education. So fundamentally, education's been broken for a while. A lot of the problem with education is the goals are inappropriate, or not the appropriate goals for what you want to accomplish. As Donald pointed out, the purpose for education is to prepare people for the world that they'll experience when they're adults, and create a workforce that is ready and able to do the things that society wants them to do. Education, for the most part, doesn't do that. The education measures you on grades and progress. It never really does a good job. There is some intermittent testing, but we seem to be doing a better job of getting rid of that than we are enhancing it. But for the most part, we start off with a child, we really don't test their aptitude to find out what areas that they need to work harder on, and what areas probably don't need a lot of work because those parts of their abilities were addressed by their parents. And this continues throughout grade school all the way through college, where we assume the student, whoever is advising the student, knows what it is they're doing with regard to providing guidance. But a lot of students aren't given any guidance at all. And a larger proportion of students, if they're given guidance by guidance counselors that are overworked, undertrained, and undermotivated themselves. And so because they're not starting with any type of objective testing, they're just starting with the subjective view of the child. Even then, they're really not guiding the child to becoming their best self. And that's where education, I think, lets us down. Way too much education by rote. You have to get through a textbook. Often those textbooks are decades old and out of date. The tests that were created from the textbook have the same aging problem. And so we can understand that kids are having a hard time becoming engaged because they're not really seeing how what they're being taught is going to help them in their future life. And because they're very tactical when they're young, they're not really thinking strategically to begin with in terms of what do they want their life to be? Do they want a family and kids? Do they want to be stable? Do they want to be mobile? Do they want something that's math heavy? Do they want something that's heavy on theory? Do they want to just roll up their sleeves and get something done, or do they want to conceptualize and create stuff? And we're all wired a bit differently. There are things that we really enjoy, and there are things that we really don't. I remember my wife took a class a few years back that talked about people as being two types. Certainly, if you've studied the Myers-Briggs stuff, we get up to far more multiple types depending on how you like Carl Jung. But the idea of two types: some people that like things to be fixed and stable, and some people like things to be fluid and in motion. And that one difference between what we like and don't like could have profound revelations or concepts driven into our education process in terms of what we will enjoy doing as we come out the back end, and what we enjoy doing as we go through education. Even how we're taught can vary. Some people are introverts and would really prefer learning on their own and studying quietly in a library, where others are extroverts and that library thing doesn't work for them at all. They want to be in groups of people discussing topics and learning that way. Nothing's wrong with either approach. One of them is going to be better for a certain personality type than another. But we do very little in terms of understanding what we're starting off with. Remember, if we're building something, you typically start off with a site plan. Then you decide what materials you're going to use. Then you lay a foundation, and then you build the structure. Well, we don't really do that with kids as they're coming out. What's the foundation? K through 12, and how is that a foundation for anything? It's a broad base of whatever was taught before, provided by rote for everybody that comes after. It's how does that leave? And for those of us that are adults and looking back, how much of what you learned in K through 12 do you now apply? Math, probably a bit of it, but anything else? Maybe you recall some of the history that you were taught, maybe a little bit of the geography. It's pretty sad though if you've ever seen some of the tests of people in geography, even remembering the capital of the state that you're in or the country that you're in often is a bridge too far. And the thing is these are things that you would think you might actually need to know to live in the region that you're in. And so we don't really have a test of what base knowledge everybody should have. We don't have an evaluation process that takes somebody through what their life is likely to be like and helps them really plan out a life, as opposed to plan out how many courses you want to take in a particular semester or quarter. We don't really do the foundational work to make sure that the structure we're building in a child becomes a well-rounded adult. And that, to a large extent, is why I think we have so much acting out right now in terms of kids in school and then people struggling with homelessness and an inability to find a career and unhappiness when they become adults, because we never built a foundation. We never really taught them how to develop themselves, and we didn't supplement them with somebody that could give them the answers that they needed, since we didn't teach them to answer the questions themselves. And then we wonder, how come education is so ineffective? And we have huge disparities, the economic disparities. If you come from a poor family, chances are your education is going to be suboptimal. If you come from a rich family, chances are you might have the best instructors, but you may not be motivated to learn whatsoever, because you figure mommy and daddy's going to give you money, so why do you need to have a job at the back end? So in the end, at both ends, we're screwing with kids. The kids that have money, who will probably turn out to be not much of anything because they figure they're going to get a free ride for the rest of their lives. And the kids that don't have anything, they're really motivated to have something, but we don't provide them with the same level of capabilities that we provide the wealthier children in order to reach the goals they want. And from a society standpoint, we really need everybody to be their best selves. I mean, the more capable, the happier, the more content a population is. In theory, the more effective it will be, the better your economic performance, the better your defense, the better your ability to provide for your population. All comes from a competence, a higher level of competence in your citizenship, in your citizens. But we don't focus on that as a goal. So from my perspective, education fails on a number of points. It doesn't accurately or effectively assess the child when it enters the system. It doesn't measure the child objectively and provide them with targeted help throughout the system. And in the end, it doesn't assure the very thing it must assure, which is that the adult is fully capable of acting as an adult when they come out the back end, and they have a good chance of finding their own true best self. They know whether they'd be better married or single. They would know how to raise children. I mean, even on that very little aspect, how many kids do we teach how to actually raise other kids? Adults come back as parents, and it's like they're in kindergarten with regard. I mean, what do we do? Formula, breastfeeding. What do we do with the kids acting out? What the kids got behavioral problems? We provide none of that. They can learn ad hoc after a problem occurs, but we don't make them comfortable with those problems as they comfortable with addressing those problems as they come up as children themselves. And so in the end result, parents aren't really doing their job either. And so this becomes a vicious circle where we're measuring what's easily measured, grades. And kids, big surprise, kids cheat to get the grades they want because that's the underlying goal. They're not connecting the grade to the better life that they might have at the back end. And to a large extent, that's because the grades have no direct impact on how they're going to exit the educational process. And we give them degrees, but the degrees don't mean they can actually do the job that they've got the degree in. It just meant they've completed the course material. There's a long discussion on people that have PhDs come back and asking themselves, why did we bother? Unless you're going to go into education, the PhD they got. I've got a friend of mine that's in this business. His PhD was written on the sewage system in Tijuana, which has nothing to do with anything that he does. But he got the PhD. The PhD was the goal. When the PhD is supposed to be kind of a certification of some capability that you can apply to do something that you might actually want to do. And in his case, and a lot of PhDs cases, the PhD was just selected because it was easy, and it gets you that doctor behind your name, but it doesn't apply to anything that you're doing. So it's kind of meaningless at the back end. So in the end, education for its own sake doesn't really make a ton of sense. And the way we should be fixing this, and the way that technology could help, is providing a better way for students to be assessed as they come in the front end, providing a better level check as they go through the educational process to see if they're getting the fundamentals, and identifying the gaps in their education that may need to be filled as they come out the back end, and also providing simulation so the kids can experience in a very real sense what the world's going to be like when they're an adult, and maybe pick a career that they might actually enjoy as they come out the back end, as opposed to saying, okay, I want to be what my dad or mom did, or I want to do what a friend's father did, or I want to be a celebrity like I saw on television, or I want to be a really rich guy with all kinds of money so I can do whatever I want. none of which turns out to be true out the back end, and we end up with kids setting expectations for themselves that they not only can't reach, but in many cases, even if they did reach them, they'd be terribly unhappy because the goal wasn't based on who they were. The goal was based on what they were presented with. And so education has a responsibility to turn out adults that are well-rounded and capable of living successfully as adults, and it fails miserably doing that. And until we fix that aspect of education, all it really is a babysitter. It's someplace the parents can stick their kids so they don't have to watch them while they're both at work, and it keeps the kids out of their hair. And, you know, if they don't come out with everything, hey, that's a problem for the future. And that's a really bad mental attitude, and probably speaks a lot to why education is the way it is today, and why we have so many kids that are coming out and ending up going back at home because they can't make a life for themselves, or end up homeless on the streets for the very same reason. And it's just very disappointing that with all the brain power we've got, we haven't been able to effectively address what should be a relatively simple problem, to connect the kids back to the education program they're in, and measure them and optimize the process for the child, not optimize the process to see how many kids we can get through the program. And I'll pass it on to Ali.
Okay. Well, my thoughts on education is that as a parent, when I sent my children to school, I wanted them to reach their potential. And I also wanted them to be in a safe environment to do so. So, and we also encouraged our children to go for their dreams. And that's what they're planning to do. So my son's got 9 weeks left of school, and then he wants to go and study film at university. And he's incredibly committed to film, and but he's an all-rounder, and he was considering going to Oxford and reading history and English, purely and simply because they don't do drama or film studies or anything. You know, they do much more pure subjects in inverted commas. So I think the thing is, and for me, I've worked in so many schools over in the UK, and there's really, really kind of deprived areas. And over here, there was a creative partnership scheme that ran from 2001 till 2011, and it brought creative practitioners into the classroom to re-engage children that were disengaged. It also kind of touches on Sir Ken Robinson's thing about creativity, and his question about whether schools kill creativity as well. And I think the thing is that we used to run creative learning projects through play and experience. So we used to do cross-curricular projects, sometimes animations or sometimes prototypes, but basically children had hands-on experience. They did research, and they had a shared and an individual experience. So they had kind of a composite part of a bigger piece. And I think the thing is that dynamic works. And I think fundamentally, there's a difference between a child that has aspirations and a child that doesn't. And there's a difference between most children that have aspirations usually have a parental support at home. So school's not the only thing, but some schools are the only foundation that children have. So there's a massive difference in an individual's circumstances. And the school can be the kind of godsend but it can also be the thing that suppresses a child and makes them feel like a failure as well. And that's, so one of my things, I deeply believe that children, particularly at primaries, shouldn't be assessed on what they can put on a piece of paper. So children that are dyslexic, they have incredible knowledge and they can articulate it. But when you try and measure it on a piece of paper, it all goes out of the window. So the thing is that the education system, I think it fails a lot of children that have huge potential, and that, when they feel like they can't do something, or they're stupid because they've got, particular special needs or something, as soon as you believe you can't do something, you won't do it. So I think that kind of self-belief and encouragement. And I think also that you learn most from when you fail and when you get things wrong as well. So I think we need to be much more accepting of when we do things wrong, we need to kind of figure out how to make it right. So it's that kind of learning experience that pushes us forward. So I think it's not as clear cut as you think it is. And also, so over here, my children are an outstanding school. It's a state school. During 2020, I built a brand new arts centre that cost a couple of million that they raised funding for, and they believe as much in creativity as they do as in academics. And as soon as we got locked down in 2020, they already had an iPad scheme to encourage more interaction and just more kind of more dynamic learning. So they pivoted straight away. So for us, they haven't dropped the ball ever, all the way through their secondary school experience. They also gave the children a flight path. So they kind of estimated, where they were at, but they were always really responsive if they achieved in certain subjects, that they'd move them up to other groups. And, so I think it's, so I just think it's really about individualized learning and understanding each child. And if you've got 32 in a class, which is how many they've got at Chip and Camden, that's a lot of children to keep engaged and keep on top of, so what their potential is. And my mum was a teacher and a head teacher and an Ofsted inspector. So for us, education's always been the be all and end all of everything. And for me, I've always worked on the other side of kind of realizing where the gaps are and where the education system's failing. And definitely Sir Ken Robinson, if nobody knows about him, he definitely criticized the education system in the UK because we still it was developed in the industrial revolution, and it's from his thinking, we still treated a child like a sausage machine. So we did the same with every individual child, and that doesn't work because everyone's unique. So I think, so in an ideal world, we'd have individual programs for each child, so it supported their needs and their way of learning. So, and obviously that's but the peer group, and for me, it's much more about children having a voice and a choice and having input, so they have ownership of their own education, and that they're still that's what's it's kind of having natural inquiry and a sense of discovery and curiosity. That's what you need to, and the teachers that really kind of engage with a child are passionate about their subject. And I don't think you can so I think for me, kind of following children's passions and supporting them so that they follow where they're most interested in and where they're gifted and talented is also, it's really important too. So yeah, it's a really complicated, discussion. But I think fundamentally, the foundation of a child makes a massive difference. And there's all kinds of factors that go into that.
Well, I really want to leverage off of what Ali said, which is education exists within a social context. So in the United States, teachers are very looked down on. It's especially K through 12 teachers is considered to be kind of a job that people get if they can't get a real job. And in fact, in some states, they're actually going to the point where they're allowing, so few people will do it because the pay is so bad and they're treated so poorly. There's no infrastructure for them, and that they're just quitting. So like in one state, Florida, they've developed, several southern states, but Florida is kind of the leader. They've developed rules about what you're allowed to teach, where they actually wound up pulling most of the books out of the libraries. So teachers can have a felony conviction with up to 5 years in prison for having a book in their classroom that isn't approved on the approved list. So I personally think that, that's a great way to get kids to read, because they can get the books on Amazon. I make the list and say, here's all the books that have been banned. The kids would just go out and read them right away. Basically, there's a lot we learn all the time about education and educating people. And one thing that's happened in the United States is that we've learned a lot about teaching math and teaching people how to do different ways of doing multiplication, for an instance, and different ways of doing division. So like I started learning the new things that they're teaching kids, and it's great. I can do, I can multiply and divide multi-digit numbers in my head now, no problem. And so basically the way they're doing it now is better than the way I did it. But the many parents are saying, well, this isn't the way I did it, and so therefore you can't do it in a new way. It's again, you're not allowed to use new educational techniques. And in the United States, it's a very mixed bag. It's a big country, and we have multiple cultures in it. But I think England has this same problem too, and the UK has this same problem too, where we have some people that are very kind of anti-intellectual or anti, and so they don't see education as really having that much value. They don't, and they're a large enough political faction that they are against new kinds of education. When we learn how to teach people better, we do new different things. And there's some people who don't want that to happen. They want to keep things happening the same way that they've always happened. And so Ali said right at the beginning that education starts at home. And when I grew up, there was walls of books in my house, and my parents read for fun. They didn't even like television. They never watched television. They just read. And so I grew up without a TV for a long time because, I was just a kid. I didn't know. And that was great. And when I left home at 17, I never had a TV in my house since. I've never had one. I watch nowadays, if shows get really, really good reviews and people are talking about them, like The Sopranos or something like that, I watch them on Netflix. But I don't have a TV, and I can't stand commercials. And so for a while, I slacked off a little bit, but I have a friend, and we were reading a book a week and discussing it for the fun of it. And anybody can, and it's because of how I was raised in the social world that I grew up in. And once I was teaching reading, I taught reading to learning disabled people at the local junior college when I was in college for a part-time job. And one day I think I was doing it as a volunteer. And one day I got a paid gig teaching this girl reading. It was so I went over to their house. I get to their house. I walk in the house, and I knew I was doomed because there wasn't a single book, a single magazine, or anything to read whatsoever inside of that house. And then the idea was I was supposed to teach this girl how to read, and her brother was in the other room watching television. And to have good education, we have to value it. So in Finland, it's harder to get into teaching school than it is to get into medical school. It's one of the most honored, valued professions. If you are a teacher in Finland, people know you are top tier. And then so it's exactly the opposite of the United States. And as a consequence, Finland has, famously one of the very best, if not the best, K through 12 education system. So I don't know exactly how to change society. But I'll say one other thing, which is I teach in industry. I really, really, really like having Chinese South Asian students, Indians, and people like that, because they have a lot of respect for education. And the fact that I've, both technical and I also have a social, I know music and sociology. I'm kind of polymath. They have a lot of respect for me, and they're very, 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 and they respect that they're older, because they have this idea that the older you get, if you keep at it, you'll probably learn more, so you might know things. Whereas in the United States, if you're old, you're done. Nobody wants to have anything to do with you. Well, that's not really true, but there's a tendency towards that. And so culture. So basically what I'm trying to say is that education is not just the mechanics of educating people and teaching people, but it's also the culture and developing a culture of education. And I think that's something that we all need to think about and work towards. Everywhere.
Reed, could you mute your microphone? It sounds like we're hearing your breathing coming over the line. And David, you're up.
Hey, thank you so much, Donald. I love what you said there. And we need to look. My one place I have a slightly different view, though, is that particularly as we look at skill training and some skill learning, it takes the village to teach that. The home is very important, but as you left your home at 17, you continue to learn up until this point in your life as well. So while the home and family is really important during the foundational years, that you have to begin to set up a way to take that and extend it to you throughout your life. Because as you and I both say, we're in a time of lifelong learning, and we see that going. And even how we see the mixes, there was a very interesting statistic I saw on the U.S. universities that in 2020, over 2/3 of the students at U.S. Universities were educated online. And that's a huge change, as you know, from what we had before. And the view to see how we're moving to education that can be just in time, where we're moving to education and skills training that can be delivered any place in the world, really, and how you can enhance your skills outside of even formal classes at a boot camp or technical school or other things like that is just increasing at an astronomical rate. So one of the things I think I'd like to do in just a second, if this is okay with you, Sharif, is touch on for a minute what are those critical skills you should get from your education and your learning and your things to be successful, since skills is in the middle of the topic for today. And you've heard me talk about some of these in the past, and I'm going to go really quickly through them. But the first one is you've got to have a good basis in communications. Donald often talks about how the communications is a key, particularly as you go back and look at his degrees and how he's been effective in his career in life. But the next one after communications, and this is one where I'm particularly bullish, is you've got to have collaboration skills. You've got to be able to collaborate not only locally, but you have to be able to collaborate at a distance. And to be able to collaborate effectively, you need not just the communication skills, but you need to understand the culture. You need to understand the people you're collaborating with. When I collaborate with people in Japan, I have to collaborate differently with them than if they're here in the United States. When I'm collaborating with some of the people in Brazil, they're still different than the way I collaborate here or in Japan. And so I think you will see that throughout as the way you communicate and collaborate become in some ways more complicated, but in other ways, it's what it should be. Because an important part of your skill development during education is how to work with others and how to get those social and emotional skills in place so that you can be successful with what you want to do in life. And social emotional learning was one of the big casualties of what happened during the pandemic. Another thing is time management. And time management is actually a skill that typically gets taught in school. And that is one that when I see people coming out from school today, is one of the big skill gaps is they don't know how to manage their time. They don't know how to do the other things. Um, Allie and Donald, you were both talking about the importance of reading, sharing information. I'm going to call that informational literacy because informational literacy is very important. The fact that I can sit here on my notebook and go and read stuff from the great libraries around the world. I can go to the latest scientific journals. I can go and see deep white papers of some of the research and other things, but you have to have the literacy to be able to go do that. So it's not just the reading, but it's also the ability to go find what you want to read. The story that Donald told about them taking the libraries out, the books out of the library, I find so interesting today, because if you go and look again at some of the studies that have been done by some of the think tanks, uh, most people today go and find the electronic things to read and not the paper books anyways. So that information literacy is so important. Organizational skills, without saying critical thinking. Critical thinking is a skill that has fallen by the wayside in some schools and education. Critical thinking is the ability to analyze facts and reach a conclusion by connecting the dots together and helping them create complex problems. You've heard me say everything today is a system, and we live in a world where complexity is one of the keys to us being successful in our life, in business, in government, and so for education to be effective, you've got to have the ability to do critical thinking. You have to become creative. Creativity is a very important part of our education today. Problem solving, curiosity. You have to be adaptable. Uh, Today technology is so important. You have to have technology literacy to be good. You have to have the ability to evaluate, to really be innovative. You've got to set goals. You have to be self-directive. You need leadership skills. And, I could keep going on these skills that are important. But what's interesting on those is if you think about the skills that I've listed, which are critical for you to be important after education, they are cross-disciplinary. They're not in one course. They're not in one topic. You have to begin to understand how to synthesize information to be successful today. And one of the key skills I would love to see go back into education is how do you synthesize information? How can you apply all those things I just talked about, the critical thinking, the information literacy, the technology literacy, the innovation and everything to be able to synthesize what you need to be done, whether it's a formal university type program, a boot camp to teach a skill, whether it's just in time electronic learning, whether you're doing it in augmented reality, virtual reality, in the metaverse, or just online looking at things like Khan Academy to have a quick update on uh, what has changed in this area. Those are some of the things that we have to do to let the average citizens really go for the future of education. The other statistic that is amazing to me is the number of people who are not going to college and universities, who are not going to formal programs. In the United States, the ability of people, even in high schools, the enrollment has dropped because they're going to alternative use. They're going to charter schools. They're going to homeschool. They're going to online open schools. And this is going to be a global trend, as I'm seeing. In some of the people I talk to in South America, they're seeing the same trends there. So education's changing. And I think because of the pandemic and because of the disruptions we saw there, both in public, private education and in training and education for corporations, we're at an inflection point, and we're right now beginning to put in place what the next generations of education and learning are going to look like. So that's my comments here.
Thanks, David. Building on this idea of things that kids should be taught, David mentioned critical thinking, which is always top of my list, but something else that I think every child should be taught, and that is to keep romance and work separate. Today, I'm reading yet another story of somebody that lost their job because of inappropriate romance at work, and throughout my career, there have been a series of CEOs that have been booted because they had inappropriate romances, and an awful lot of people that I've worked with that have gotten in trouble for having romance at work, and I've myself, I dated once in work, but it was never a subordinate. It was a peer, but never a subordinate. But in the end, the advice that a friend of mine's father gave while we were working for him one summer kind of stuck out, and it certainly ages me. But that was the "don't stick your pen in the company ink" advice, and that's because what happens is it creates complexity. One of the worst experiences I had as a manager is I had a female employee who was crying pretty much consistently. I give her any feedback whatsoever, she just burst into tears. And for the life of me, I thought I must be the most horrible manager on the planet because I clearly had no empathy, or something was wrong because I wasn't trying to be difficult. Turned out she was having an affair with. She married both her and another employee working for me were married, and they were having an affair, and her husband had found out about it, and that's why she was crying. It had nothing to do with me as a manager at all. But the end result was it just blew up the team. The level of aggravation. Her husband showed up at work one time wanting to beat the crap out of her coworker that was sleeping with her, and eventually she left her husband. The coworker left his wife. They got married together, and then she caught that coworker having an affair within a year of them getting married to somebody else. And so in the end, it was just one drama after another that could have been avoided, at least in the workplace, if they decided to date people outside of the workplace. And right now, and particularly with regard to how we're doing work, it very well may be that the only people of the opposite sex you're coming in contact with, or same sex, depending on your proclivities, are people that you're working with, which does kind of narrow the pool of people you can select from, and makes dating in the workplace far more likely and prevalent and problematic. So that's one of the things we really should be educating kids about. And when kids are in school, clearly they're going to be dating other kids that are in school and classes, and that doesn't seem to be as big a problem, though. Certainly, if you've ever seen a breakup in high school or college, some of those can get pretty ugly too, particularly if both students are in the same class or in the same social groups. But really keeping an eye on your relationships and making sure that they are additive to your life and goals and will not end up being destructive is important. Another area that we really should start off teaching kids is learning how they learn. Really understanding the way the child best takes knowledge in. Everybody should understand what methodology works best for them in terms of learning. Some people, they need to hear it, they need to read it, and then they need to visually see it before it actually sinks in. Others don't have those three requirements. Some are much more visually oriented. Some people learn much better by learning from doing than they do by reading. I'm one of those folks. I learn much better if I can actually physically do something as opposed to just reading about it. And I think we all do better learning when we can see how we can apply that learning after we picked it up. It tends to make us stick with us. So if we read something or whatever, but we don't know what we can do with it, then chances are we won't remember it after a couple of years. And so that time to a large extent was wasted. Where if we're taken through and we're shown how we can apply what it is we learned, either in our future life or our present life, we're much more likely to retain what it is we learn and carry that learning forward and be able to apply it properly. Because the other issue we've got with education is we may actually learn something, but we may not learn how to apply it properly. It was a big lesson for me back when I was a mechanic and I was learning how to do a brake job, was the fact that it's incredibly critical that the master cylinder is super clean. I mean, almost medically clean before you do assembly. Otherwise, it's going to leak and it's going to fail. So I learned how to do the rebuild. I initially hadn't learned how important it was for that particular aspect, and so I wasn't very good at it initially. And that's pretty much the same as you go through life. It's sometimes it's the very little things that must be done to complete a task that you need to learn in order to be successful at that underlying task. But if you learn by rote, and if your first application of knowledge comes long after you've been educated in it, you might miss a couple of those things. And much like I missed that problem with making sure the master cylinder was extremely clean, the end result could be suboptimal, and you stand back because you didn't learn the part you missed, and nobody's really observing you. You don't know why you're failing. And so really being able to carry through from education to application where at all possible makes a huge difference in terms of really understanding the importance of the smaller elements. So the aspects of life that you need to go through. Oh, one final thing we don't teach kids enough about, and it was an optional course when I was in high school, was home economics. When a child comes out and goes out on their own, they should know the basics. They should know how to budget. They should know how to, whatever they need to do their clothes, that they should know how basic care and feeding of an automobile, if they're going to have it. Fortunately, nowadays they can use Uber or Lyft. But understanding how to best use Uber and Lyft would be important as well, because of course there are times when those services are more expensive than others. And there are risks to using Uber and Lyft in terms of getting in a car that may not be an Uber car when you thought it was, and ending up someplace you don't intend to be. So making sure that you just have the common sense skills that you need when you come out on your own could make a huge difference. So you're not in crisis and you're not afraid of being an adult moving away from home. Because you just haven't learned the underlying basics. I remember going way back to my stepmother, who clearly was struggling with being a mother of a child when she became a housewife, because her parents hadn't taught her how to clean, hadn't taught her how to cook. So now she's trying to do all these things and clearly being criticized a great deal for her inability to do it by her mother-in-law. And it created a pretty toxic environment for my young childhood, as a result of the fact that she had just never bothered to learn some of the basics about taking care of a house. And in that age, the women stayed home and were housewives, and the men went off and went to work and had affairs, and the very inappropriate period of time in life. But the fact that she hadn't learned those underlying skills made for a horrible home life for both her and us as kids. And it wasn't her fault. It was the fact that she hadn't been taught that stuff when she was a child. So basic home economic skills, critical thinking, and making sure that kids understand the risks they're taking by doing things like having a relationship at work would play a huge role in kind of preventing the catastrophes that occur. One other thing. That one of the best things that I did as a child is my grandfather, because he didn't know what to do with me, I was kind of out of control. Took me around one summer and hired a tutor and showed me how things worked. So I saw how people that didn't have things lived, the indigenous workers, homeless people. I saw what happened to people when they overdosed on drugs, went to mental hospitals. I saw what happened to people when they went to prison. I visited prisons. A lot of that stuff really kind of formed an opinion in my head about the places I didn't want to be when I grew up. Those are things that I think every child should go through. Here are the repercussions of the things that you might otherwise do, because they sound like they're fun at the moment. Seeing a paraplegic certainly made it clear that maybe doing things like jumping off cliffs, which I was doing at the time, was particularly not advisable. It could end up really badly. And I sure as hell didn't want to be a paraplegic. So it moderated to a great deal my behavior. Unfortunately, I never ended up in jail, never had an overdose on drugs. I never had some of that. I've never been homeless. I was able to budget and carry through even from a very young age. And so the end result is I didn't have to experience in a different way some of those very horrible outcomes. And I think every child should go through that kind of a training so they understand before they get into it what a repercussion feels like. Because often with regard to children, and we just had a situation here where I live where I was nearly mugged, and another guy came through having something different. He was mugged and nearly badly hurt. But it was because, and the kids were arrested, had full felony arrest. Had they realized what the repercussions of what it was they were doing, they might not have done it. And now they're in juvenile hall. Something could avoid it and have a felony on their record. And so if we can teach kids that repercussions of what it is they might do early on, I think we can do a better job of helping kids avoid those dire outcomes that I think all of us would like to see avoided. Now pass over to Talib. You're on. You're muted. Talib, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I want to apologize for my voice. My voice is not good enough. I know it's not strong enough, but I think I'm heard. Okay. What I want to say here is I enjoyed all your interventions very much, from Ali to Donald to David to Rob. Every one of you did something very special. But what I'm saying now is that the educational system that we're in now is a result of Middle Ages, really. We're not innovating in education at all. We still have two basic educational categories. We have under 18 and over 18. Under 18 is schools. You still stay with your parents, but you go to school. You go to a school now. Now, upper education or university education, you can leave your home. In our part of the world, we definitely leave our homes and come to you guys. We come to the West because these institutions of the West have built themselves throughout the years, from the Middle Ages till now. I think today we need to revisit all of that. I think what I heard from all of you is the need to revisit our educational system, because what we're doing now is something that is really not very suitable for our time. Our time, online learning, for example, COVID had put us in a situation where you can't really do without online working education. Now, online education needs a different kind of teacher, because the teacher there is not interacting directly with the students. So he needs to be different to keep the students attracted to him or her. So what we can say here is the whole education system needs revision, because now, especially after the artificial intelligence, I think that we need to look at the whole educational system and revise it again. And that would take us to very unknown territories. For example, I'm not sure that the age of 18 is a cutting age between a school and a university. You work all your time in school until you get a degree from school. That degree would allow you to either enter a university or not enter a university. If you don't enter a university, life goes in a certain direction. If you enter a university, your life goes in a different direction also. Now, when you enter a university, it has to be a good university. Otherwise, you won't do well. Now, what does that all mean? Now, I think we need to review the issue of this 18 years as limiting age. I think education is lifelong learning. I agree with David and Donald. It's lifelong learning. It's not something that cuts us at an age. Now, what we have at universities, for example, today, is degrees. These degrees are based on years of school. You spend 4 years to get a BA, then you spend another 2 years to get a master's, and 3 years to get a PhD. For example, I did all of that. But the fact is that we need to revise all of that. I don't think we need to stay that long at schools, universities, I mean. I think what we need to do is think of a new way of bringing up our children. I think what Rob said is very, very important. These are problems that we face in real life. Now, what do we do about that? What we need to do is to revise the whole system. And that would include also the number of years and the number of courses, the number of classes that we need to attend. Because you can't have a doctor or an engineer that is the same doctor and engineer that we had now. That's going to be a different person, going to be a different outcome altogether. And that needs maybe lesser time at the academic area, more time at the real world. Because real education is to be put in a situation where you learn something. It's not in skills only, not in academics only. It's how you learn something out of a situation. I personally, for example, I studied architecture. I'm an architect. I taught at the University of Jordan and University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Now, what I did there, I didn't finish in my life because I was put in a different situation. I went into politics, and politics drove me from one position to another. Now, I knew from the beginning that I am inclined towards politics, but I did not know how that would work in my life and my future. Now, what we need to do now is to look at the educational system, revise it again, and make sure that the academic part is reduced to the minimum, because the academic part you could get now from the internet, you could get from artificial intelligence, you could get anywhere. You don't need to memorize anything anymore. You need to understand it. You need to understand life. That's more important than understanding your specialization in life. Because if you graduate with some degree, you're not necessarily going to work in that degree. I did not work in that degree at all. I'm not an architect anymore, although I could have been a good architect. I designed my own house. I designed many places where I won awards on that. But I'm not an architect anymore. So I think what we need to do is put students into real situation, real life situation, not just training, not just skill training, but put them in situations where they learn something, learn life. That's what we need to do. And we need to rethink the whole thing. Maybe 3-4 years. It's too long a period. I think that we need to have people in schools now, after 18 or before 18. But these schools will have to be the periods of time when they study. Things will have to be revisited again. I think that's what we need to do now. Now, our part of the world, we respect the teachers very much. We will continue to respect the teachers. It's in our culture, it's in our history. I think Donald said something like that. Now, that doesn't mean that we know how to do things right, because we are just going to Western universities. Western universities have been there since the Middle Ages, but now they need to change. They really need to change. That's what I want to say for the time being. Thank you so much, Dr. Sharif. Ali.
Okay.
Ali, I think we have closing remarks. I think we're over time.
Okay. Well, so during my experience in education, actually, I was lucky enough to see Lord David Putnam, and through the meeting, we had a meeting at the House of Lords, actually, and one of the things that he said, bearing in mind that he didn't do a university degree, he went straight into the film industry and went up to kind of a CEO and had incredible, but anyway, so, and he was from London, which was where my dad was from. And I think one of the things that he said is when he went into the workforce, you had a job for life. And now it's very unusual that that's going to happen. And I think that we need to equip our young people so that they're creative and versatile, and they can turn their hands to a multiple kind of skill base. And I think all that's been said about communication and collaboration and all that's really, really important too. But I think the thing is, that there's definitely an entrepreneurial kind of view of things that I've got, because I didn't even realize that I was an entrepreneur when I won Social Entrepreneur of 2013. And essentially my business had a social and an educational impact. And the thing is that I wasn't trying to jump on the bandwagon to make that social and education, that's always, and the thing is that I think that the one thing that we do in a service industry is to make a difference and realize where there's shortfalls and how we can fix them. And I think in the world is that, is that I think the reason that we're, we've got the gifts and talents and we're born into wherever we are in the world is that there's something we can do with what we bring to the table that can make change. And I think that ultimately our young people, from my experience, are incredible change makers that are very well educated and have information at their fingertips as well. And I think the thing is that good schools actually create independent thinkers and learners that have their own points of view. And I don't think we want to have, an education system or a world that wants everyone to think in the same way. So, and I think the thing is that culturally, I've spent lots of time in Malaysia. I've spent lots of time in the States. The culture difference between the States and England is massive. The education experience in the States is massive too. So, so my experience of America was that grammatically and, on paper, their education system didn't seem as good, but their ability to articulate was incredible. So, and I think in schools in the UK, we're encouraged to be quiet. And that's something that, I think it's really important for children to develop their voice and be able to be expressive, all the way through school. So I think kind of discipline shouldn't be about keeping them quiet, but it should be about engaging them. And I think for me, I think if you're passionate about what you do, whatever you do every day of your life, you'll still get up and do it. So I think, to love what you do is really important. So, in an ideal world, our children wouldn't be, I don't think the education system should simply train our children to go into industries that the industries are creating. Because also I think that there's better ways forward than that. So I don't, I think most people want autonomy and want choice. They don't want to be pushed into a silo. So for me as an individual, I encourage individualism. So and for us, I think we should encourage our children and our students to be free thinkers that want to make the world a better place. So that's. And whether that pathway is through kind of industry-led things or whether it's through higher education, so there isn't access to education for everyone, and not everyone can afford to go into higher education. But there's ways through, and I think the thing is that people can connect. Technology enables is a kind of a local and a global kind of connection that we've never had before, and that's what we should be as a team on the Innovation Forum. Is creating something that kind of makes those bridges, because they're possible. And so I just think that we need to look at where best practice is and then take it on an online. So I'm part of the Royal Society of Arts, and when we got locked down in 2020, the online learning went ahead. They reckon it's a decade ahead of what it would have been because we were forced to do it. But the gaps between provision, some students didn't have technology at home, so they couldn't be online schooled, but those that did could. So I think it's, there's huge disadvantage in some areas and not others, but there's possibilities, and that kind of potential needs to be kind of grasped and kind of move forward, so that we kind of create children and young people that fulfill their potential and have happy, contented lives. So, I think most people that go on drugs or, do things don't have any purpose. And a lot of the time it's because the education system and maybe their home situations let them down so that they don't feel, so I think it's kind of a very complex thing. But that kind of free thinking, independent learning is incredibly important. That's it for me.
Well, I certainly agree with the idea of trying to get to have each person to learn to have each person be able to find what it is that they can offer that's makes them the best person. And since we're all individuals, every person has something to bring to the table. That's why humans are successful, is because we don't all have to, do the same thing completely by ourselves. We can get knowledge and information from other people. People can do things. One person can do what they're good at, another person can do what they're good at, and we all work together. And one of the things about something that Rob said, which is about collaboration, and was it Rob or was it anyway? It might have been David, but we talked about the whole idea of collaboration and being able to work together and work in teams and all those kinds of things. We can't do that. Learn to do that, or you can learn to do that, but we have not as well, because people work together in teams when they're playing World of Warcraft. I mean, there's ways that you can learn to strategize and play with other people by playing games online and things like that. So it's not undoable, but we're real humans. We're communicating with body language and a whole bunch of stuff that face-to-face is much richer. The information exchange between us when we're face-to-face is richer than what we're doing right now, which is, it's wonderful, but it is richer if we're together. And what we haven't mentioned or focused on a little bit is the importance of teachers and mentors, because when I'm a teacher and I teach a lot. I've mostly taught technical stuff in industrial settings. I mean, that's where I've had tens of thousands of students. And so what I'll be doing is teaching how operating systems work, how programming, how to, learning certain programming languages, various things like that. And every one of them, when I develop a course, the first thing I do is develop the exercises. So I sit down and I think, what is it, what skill, what would I like the people to be able to do at the end of the course that's going to be valuable and useful to them? And in the way I teach is I encourage the students to talk to each other during exercises. So I tell the students right up in front, I say, if you guys are all talking to each other during the exercises, I feel like I'm doing a good job of teaching, because you can work on something for looking through program manuals, which never tell the whole story, for days trying to figure out how to solve some problem, that if you just stood up and put your head over to the cubicle to the person next to you, they've already gone through it and they can answer the question for you in 2 seconds. And so the ability to have communication skills is the most important skill that you could possibly have. And that, I think, is harder to develop in a useful way online. Because it's the way that you take turns and things like that. It's just different online than it is when you're together. But I also want to go back to the point of a teacher, because when I'm teaching these courses, I'll have like 16 students, and I'll teach the same course many times. And so I get to the point where I'll be, I can tell by the tone of the person's voice when they scream or moan, or exactly where they are in the exercise and what problem they're having. I mean, I could just tell, oh, I know that this person forgot to put a parentheses after such and such, and that's why they're having this problem. I mean, I just know just by the sound of their voice, the sound of their groans, where they are. And I'll come over to them and I'll, and they're different people. Every person has it for a different problem, for a different reason. But the feedback, then I'll be able to sit with them and talk to them and understand where it is that what they need. and get them through it. And I always encourage my students. And so I feel that part of what I'm teaching isn't just the material that I'm teaching, but it's also how to respond to the problems and that you're having. So I try and teach my students right from the beginning. I often tell in my classes, I say, if you're doing these exercises and nothing goes wrong, you're not learning anything, because your mistakes are what teach you things. So you can't really make a mistake. And so I've literally had students in my class go, "Yay, something went wrong. I'm learning something. Come over, Don, help me." And so I feel, I got a 5-day class I'm teaching people. It's, 8 hours a day for 5 days. But it took me years to learn this stuff. Years. So I can't teach them what I know in 5 days, but what I can teach them is how to learn and how to feel about what they're doing. And so if they come out and they feel that it's fun and it's interesting, and they don't feel bad about experimenting and making mistakes and messing around and stuff like that, then I feel like I've done a good job. And so that's something you have to model. You have to have somebody like me to model. And I see that's our real challenge, is that we need to develop mentors, other kinds of ways that we can teach everybody to be teachers in a sense. And so that we can all learn from each other and really make things. I think that's what we're doing. That's when we say that we go out to industry and really learn the most in real life, and less in the classroom. I think that's what we're saying. I mean, I learned I learned most of what I learned about programming and stuff from just riding in the car with people, just talking to somebody that knew more than I did, or sitting with a group of people debugging a program together while we're all just talking about it and trying to brainstorm on what the problem is. Things like that. We're all teaching each other, and that's I wish we could somehow teach people to value that and get better at it. So that's my concluding remark.
Thanks, Donald. So we had a pretty good conversation about education and how broken it is. The end all be all in terms of education is the student still owns the responsibility to assure that they're fully educated, because the education institutions have largely failed to step up to that responsibility. And perhaps the one thing we should teach kids early on is to take responsibility for their life. Expecting somebody else to step in and help them all the time, as much as parents and educators would like to do that, is simply not always going to happen. And if the student or the child recognizes early on that the responsibility at the end of the day is going to be them, because when they get older, they're the ones that are going to suffer if these things aren't done properly. And so taking that responsibility on and recognizing that they own the outcome, because as much as other people might want to own the outcome, chances are they just won't be able to step up and do that, would probably be the most important thing. I've watched a lot of kids as they turn into adults being incredibly depressed and feeling lost, because the protective measures that they were wrapped with as children were no longer in existence. And the fact of the matter is, looking back, a lot of them probably weren't in existence even back then when they were kids. They just assumed they were in place. So letting the child know early that they own the outcome of their life, and then when other things break down, they're responsible for filling those underlying gaps, may be the best and easiest path to trying to solve some of these problems early on. Because fixing education globally, fixing parenting globally, those are all huge tasks. But perhaps educating a child early on to the very concept that they own the outcome of their life and they need to take that ownership on early and perhaps take a more active role in making sure that they craft the life that they want would be the most important thing we can do for our kids. And that's my wrap up. Moving to Talib. You're on, and then we need to move on because we're way over time.
Thank you. I want to say something about what Ali and Donald said. Ali was concentrating on the issue of having to respect the talents of the people. And Donald was sharing with us his experience. Now, what I think they're both right. We all said the right things, but we need to find solutions for all of this. We can't just keep talking about it. Now, Donald, you're a great teacher, but you need to make more teachers like you. And you need to teach not in a school, not in the university, as you do now, I think. I don't know, where do you teach, Donald? Can I ask you, where do you teach?
I teach in industry mostly. So right now I'm not. I teach quite a few things. I teach programming and software stuff, but I also teach people how to be lucky. I teach some social network analysis, some sociology. I teach quite a few things.
Yeah, I think that's what makes you special, really. But that's the kind of teacher that we need for the future. But how can we make those teachers? And how do we make the system that accommodates them and promotes them? Because that's the respect that you need to get from the people. And
it's a good question.
Now, that's a good question. How do we make that happen? Well, what we said, we need to revise our systems of education. We need to really review the whole thing right from the start. How does a student go to a class? And how does he go to a university? What does he do in a university? How many years does he spend there? And all of this has to be asked. Because without that, we'll not get anywhere. That's what I wanted to say, basically. Because what we need to do, all of us, is make this world a better place, for sure. We can't make this world a better place unless we do our jobs right. Our job in life is to make it a better place, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is excellent discussions, and fully
discussion.
From today's sessions, our audience. Most importantly, I get lot of question from our speakers that who will be our audience. So yeah, this is. I just want to share that we are working very hard, and
Sharif, you're breaking up pretty bad.
all of them.
Pick it up. We can't hear you. Can't hear you.
You're breaking up and freezing. It looks like you're about to crash. Oh, looks like you may have crashed already.
You're frozen.
Oh well.
Isn't technology a wonderful thing?
Yeah.
It is what it works.
I guess all together, isn't it?
We need to get Sharif a better internet connection.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Okay, Sharif. You can speak now.
Well, everybody, it's wonderful to see you all, and I hope you have a fabulous week, and life. People say have a nice day, and I think, gosh, that's so short term. I mean, have a great life, you know. that's what I think.
Take a longer perspective. Well,
Yeah,
thanks.
take a longer perspective. Always wonderful to see you guys. Bye. See you next
Take
time.
care. See you
Take
next
care.
time.
Bye, Anne.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Dr. Talib.